Hello everyone. Tonight, I have a gentle, mysterious story to share with you. One that's perfect for helping you relax and drift off to sleep. It's a slow-burning crime tale set in a quiet American town where the disappearance of an old diary unfolds like a bedtime mystery. So get comfortable, close your eyes if you'd like, and let me take you to Maple Hollow, where even the calmest nights can hide a secret. It was the kind of quiet Tuesday evening when the small town of Maple Hollow felt like it was drifting off to sleep along with the rest of the world. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and distant rain that never seemed to arrive. Porch lights glowed like sleepy eyes along the empty streets. In the heart of town stood the old Claymore Public Library, a red brick building that hadn't changed much since the 1940s. A single lamp glowed above its carved wooden doors, casting a soft yellow pool of light on the cracked stone steps. Inside, Miss Eleanor Blythe, the library's long-serving head librarian, was finishing her nightly routine. She moved slowly and methodically, her soft-soled shoes making almost no sound as she glided from aisle to aisle, adjusting chairs, checking return books, and writing in the logbook she had kept since the day she started the job nearly 40 years ago. The library's grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner, each second stretching out like the night itself. At precisely 8 p.m., Eleanor turned the brass key in the library's old lock and stepped outside, pulling her shawl tighter against the breeze. As she walked home, she passed the wide fountain in the town square, the water dark and still under the pale light of the street lamps. She never noticed the small shape moving through the shadows behind the benches. It wasn't until the next morning that anyone realized something was wrong. When the library reopened at 9 a.m., the first patron of the day, Mr. James Whitaker, a retired accountant who loved to read old crime novels, noticed something odd. One of the glass display cases in the library's local history room stood open. The case had housed the town's only known copy of the Hollow Creek Ledger, a handwritten diary from 1892 that detailed the founding of Maple Hollow and the life of the town's earliest settlers. The book was gone. Eleanor's hands shook as she called the local sheriff's office. Sheriff Douglas Price arrived within 15 minutes, his cruiser pulling up to the curb outside the library, its lights off and sirens silent. Sheriff Price was a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with a deliberate way of speaking that made every conversation feel like a slow dance. He stepped inside the library, removed his hat, and looked around as if expecting the missing book to appear on a shelf. He listened carefully as Eleanor explained how she had locked up the night before and how the library's alarm system had been broken for over a week, waiting for repairs. She led him to the display case, where a thin layer of dust marked the empty velvet cushion where the diary had sat for years. There were no fingerprints on the glass, no signs of forced entry at the front door. The back door, however, showed faint scratches near the lock. Sheriff Price stood quietly for several minutes, eyes fixed on the scratched doorframe. "Seems like someone knew exactly what they were looking for," he said softly, almost to himself. He made a note in his worn leather notebook, flipping back several pages as though searching for a connection. Then he looked up at Eleanor, his voice calm and low. "Anyone know that alarm wasn't working?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Just me and the repairman, and maybe a few regulars. I mentioned it to Mr. Whitaker and a couple others. It's an old building. Things break all the time." Sheriff Price spent the day quietly questioning staff, volunteers, and the small handful of people who had visited the library in the past week. He took his time, never raising his voice, each conversation meandering like the slow current of the town's creek. People found themselves telling him more than they planned, lulled by his gentle questions and the unhurried silences that followed. As evening settled over Maple Hollow, a light rain finally began to fall, making the streets shine under the lamplight. Sheriff Price sat in his office at the small brick station across from the diner. He spread photographs across his desk, the empty display case, the scratches on the back door, the library's logbook with its careful list of visitors. His desk clock ticked steadily. Outside, the sound of raindrops on the window was soft, steady, almost comforting. The sheriff's main suspect was someone who had always shown an unusual interest in the town's history. A man named Lester Crawley, who ran the antique shop near the highway. Lester was known for two things: his encyclopedic knowledge of local lore and his deep frustration that his shop rarely got visitors anymore. He often told stories of rare items he dreamed of selling, hoping to put Maple Hollow back on the map. The next morning, Sheriff Price paid Lester a visit. The antique shop was a cluttered maze of old clocks, faded paintings, and glass display cases filled with mismatched china. Lester, a wiry man with thinning hair and round glasses, greeted the sheriff with a cautious smile. They spoke in quiet tones, their words drifting among the ticking clocks and dust motes floating in the morning light. Lester insisted he knew nothing about the missing diary. He offered to let the sheriff search the shop, even opening drawers and cabinets without being asked. Sheriff Price accepted the offer, his steps slow and unhurried as he examined the shelves, taking in every old photograph and leather-bound book. In one display case near the back of the shop, Sheriff Price paused. Inside was a collection of small, rare volumes, but none were the lost diary. Days turned into a week, and the rain gave way to clear skies. The search continued, quietly but persistently. Sheriff Price's routine never changed. He made his rounds, asked his questions, and listened more than he spoke. The town settled back into its comfortable pace. Even the library reopened, though the empty spot in the display case felt like a wound everyone could see. One evening, just as the sun was setting behind the rolling hills west of town, Eleanor noticed a small brown package propped against the library's front door. She looked around, but the street was empty, the last traces of daylight fading. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped the plain paper. Inside was the missing diary, its worn leather cover familiar and reassuring. There was no note, no explanation, only the book itself, returned as quietly as it had disappeared. Sheriff Price examined the package, but found no fingerprints or clues. The diary had no new markings, no pages missing. The mystery of who had taken it and why they had returned it remained unsolved. In his final report, Sheriff Price wrote that the book had been temporarily misplaced under suspicious circumstances, a phrase that would be repeated with a knowing smile in town for years to come. Maple Hollow returned to its sleepy rhythm, and the story of the library's missing diary became part of local lore. People would bring it up over coffee at the diner or while waiting in line at the post office. Children walking home from school would point at the library's stone steps and whisper about the night the diary disappeared. The library itself felt a little different after that. Not dangerous, but alive with the sense that something had happened there that no one fully understood. Miss Eleanor Blythe continued her nightly routine as if nothing had changed. She dusted the shelves, adjusted the chairs, and recorded the day's visitors in her logbook. But each night, as she locked the library's old doors, she paused for a moment to look at the display case. The diary sat there once again, exactly where it belonged, under the watchful gaze of the library's quiet halls. Sheriff Price never stopped wondering who had taken the book or what they had hoped to find. He would lean back in his chair some nights, the low hum of the town outside his window, and think about the scratches on the door, the quiet return of the diary, and the silence of the person who took it. He accepted that some questions didn't have answers, and in a town as old and slow-moving as Maple Hollow, mysteries could linger like the last light of evening, comforting in their own way. And so, the story faded into the fabric of the town, a soft mystery that ended not with a bang, but with a book quietly placed where it had always belonged. The people of Maple Hollow slept a little more soundly, knowing their history was safe, even if the secret of its brief disappearance would remain forever hidden among the quiet streets and gentle breezes of their small, unhurried town. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope you enjoyed this quiet mystery and that it helped you relax. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a new tale. Sleep well, take care, and I'll see you in the next story.